Right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you for joining us, everyone, on this Saturday afternoon. This webinar is going to focus on school governance, school boards and principals. And our guest speaker today is Carole Everett from NJAIS, the New Jersey Association of Independent Schools. I'm going to introduce her and then have her begin maybe with just telling us a little bit about herself in addition to what I have here, inshallah. So Carole Everett became the executive director of the New Jersey Association of Independent Schools in July 2010. Her prior career in independent schools included teaching Latin, music, and public speaking, serving as the director of college counseling, director of admissions and financial aid, diversity coordinator, director of development, assistant head for external affairs, and the head of school. She also worked in college admissions at Barnard and was the director of admissions at the Juilliard School, overseeing college and graduate school admissions for dance, drama, and music. She served at a series of schools, including one in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, and spent some time in Italy. I'll have you tell us a little bit about that. Her background is very impressive. She's served in many different positions. I'm going to have her talk a little bit about it because I wasn't familiar with some of these things that you shared in your bio. But obviously in the arts with music, and you're a singer as well, so maybe we can hear a few tunes. Carole did graduate from the Barnard College of Columbia University and holds an advanced degree from the Universidad, pronounce it for me. Universidad de Siena.
Very good.
She also studied at Juilliard and Manhattan School of Music. A mezzo-soprano, Carole performed with opera companies and orchestras and on recital tours around the world. Miss Everett is a native of Wellesley, Massachusetts, and lives in New York City with her husband, son, and golden doodle puppy. So I'm sure your husband and son are wonderful, but what's your doodle puppy's name?
His name is Cosmo. He's 11 months and he may come bounding in at some point. And for that, I apologize in advance, but it is that puppy energy.
All right, great. So would you tell us a little bit about your experience with independent schools and what you've been doing while with NJAIS?
So as you've heard in my bio, for over 40 years, I've served as a teacher and in many administrative posts and ultimately as a head of school. And I've served on several boards in independent schools. At NJAIS, we have 90 schools in membership. And for those schools, we oversee their accreditation, their professional development for trustees, teachers, and administrators. And we do advocacy work to make sure that our schools remain independent without governmental interference.
Can you expand a little bit on why it's important to have autonomy as independent schools?
It's extremely important that our schools remain outside of certain governmental regulations, such as the odious Scantron tests that take up so much of public school teachers' time. Teaching to a test is antithetical to best practices in independent schools.
Thank you, Carole. I think that's important for us to be reminded of, as sometimes the demand from parents to compare what's happening in our schools to public schools. We always turn back to standardized testing, and I think that's one of the greatest benefits is that we're not bound by any of that. So thank you for sharing that. As Islamic schools, I appreciate your support for the past 2 years for one. I don't know how we would have gotten through this pandemic without all the resources you've provided. But I think that you have an understanding of what our Islamic school demographics are and some of our unique needs are. So I'm hoping that you can address those as well in your presentation, and our audience will have an opportunity to ask questions after the presentation. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'd appreciate it if you could go ahead and start.
Thank you so much, Layla, for having me. And congratulations to you on 2 years of superb leadership at Nur Ul Iman School, a school I really value so highly in our association. And your presence has meant so much within the association and also within New Jersey, where you also serve on the Governor's Non-Public Advisory Committee. So you are a model leader, and it is my honor to be with you today. So I thought that we would get started by doing a brief overview of best practices in independent school nonprofit governance. But before I ever start on a presentation of this sort, I have to say thank you. How many of you, put in the chat room, would you, are principals, and how many of you are board members? Can you just put that in a cascade in the chat room? Okay, so we've got a mix. Well, to those of you who are principals, congratulations for making it this far in the hardest year ever. For those of you who are trustees, you give your time, your talent, your treasure, your wisdom, your wealth, and your work, and you have been supportive, I hope, of your heads, of your principals in this very difficult year. So I start by saying thank you. There are 3 essential roles for the Nonprofit School Board of Trustees. So would you put in the chat room what you think those 3 essential roles are? And Layla, if you could help me by reading some of those out loud, that would be great. Go ahead and start reading, Layla.
Finances, strategic planning, finances, establishing bylaws, securing funding, offering expertise when needed, finance, policy, planning, president, secretary, and treasurer. I'm not sure if that means this individual serves in all 3 capacities. Establishing bylaws, policies.
These are all good. So the first thing that a school board wants to do is to hold the school and its mission in trust. The second thing is to serve as fiduciaries of the school. For all of you who said finances, you can pat yourselves on the back. And then you hire, nurture, support, and we hope not, but when needed, fire the head of school, the principal. What do we mean by holding the mission in trust? We mean that you know the mission of the school. Many boards actually put the school's mission right on the agenda so that it's front and center. That you take off, if you are a current parent in the school, you take off that parent hat and think of children's children, that you're governing the school for generations. You're obeying the school's purpose via the bylaws and the articles of incorporation. You're showing allegiance to the school's philosophies and its values and advocating for the educational program. And you're always serving as school ambassadors in the larger community. What do we mean as serving as fiduciaries? You provide financial security for the school. You are the leaders in fundraising. You set policies on investments, endowment, and financial aid. You strategize for the future to ensure the long-term viability of the school. You oversee the financial matters the annual audit that every responsible school financial audit should be having, and you set the tuition. And that's a real moment when you take off that parent hat and think at the 35,000-foot level. Who prepares the budget at your school? You can put your responses in the chat room, please.
Principal, 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 principal.
Good. I would say that this is one of those joint areas where the principal and the finance officer of the school work with department heads and division heads to come up with an overall proposal. But then it goes to the finance committee, who then makes a proposal to the entire board on the budget. And financial aid should never be, should only be a board issue when it's setting the financial aid budget and the policy. But when it comes to making ultimate financial aid decisions, what family receives what amount of scholarship, it should be the director of admissions, the business officer, and when needed, the head of school. There should be no board involvement at that level.
We did have several people say board and principal. I realized that when I read it, it was all principal in the beginning.
And then when we determine salaries in a school, that is the job for the head of school. The board sets the budget and sets the head of school, the principal's salary. But it is the principal who sets salaries for all teachers, administrators, and staff. Who's the board's one employee? Go and put your thoughts in the chat room.
All right, principal, head of school, principal, head of school, principal, head of school, principal. I think we're on track there.
Get it, 100% A+. The head of school, the principal, is your one employee. You hire, nurture, and support that person. You ensure succession and transition plans. But what about the faculty and admissions and administration and staff? That's the job of the head of school, to hire the faculty, the administration, and the staff. I would argue that the most important relationship in an independent school is between the head of school and the chair of the board of trustees. That has got to be a functional, communicative, trusting relationship. When it's not, everything goes downhill. The other really critical relationship in the school is the relationship between the principal and the business officer, the business manager, the COO, the CFO, whatever you call that person, who should not be afraid to speak truth to power and say, no, you may not pay for that. You may not go and get 99 new plexiglass whatevers. We can afford only 40. So the head of school has such a complicated job. Back in the old days, even before I was a head of school, the head of school job was not 24/7. It was a nice 5-day-a-week job, and there were regular vacations. And some heads would take the entire month of July off. Boy, that doesn't happen anymore. And these poor heads are exhausted right now after the year that they've had. So we've gone through the head as the board's one employee, and how the head, the principal, works with the faculty, staff, administrators, parents, students, alumni, the board, and other educators. It's important for your principal to be involved in other organizations outside of the school. So here we are with the board and school principal relationship. There has to be mutual respect, common expectations, cooperative planning. I always believe in a culture of no surprises, and there has to be mutual evaluation. So we're going to get to that. So the responsibilities of the board include conducting business via committees and task forces. So typically on a board of trustees, you have a finance committee, a development committee, sometimes a marketing committee, sometimes a buildings and grounds committee. There should be an audit committee that is separate from the finance committee. You should have a nominating committee. Sometimes it's called the Committee on Trustees that establishes a policy on how you invite new members and vote on new members to the Board of Trustees. And then there's often an executive committee made up of the board chair, sometimes a vice chair or vice president, the secretary and treasurer of the board. Although some very evolved boards are just now having a board chair and a secretary because communications have become so much more fluid and adaptable for unplanned meetings that you don't need to just call together the executive committee. And it's better not to have a bifurcated board, but to have a functional one system board where everyone's in the communication loop. The responsibilities of the board also include taking a lead in fundraising. And I would stress to you that our board members that you should make the school for which you are serving your primary charity, and hiring and supporting the head of school. I just cannot say that enough, especially in these times. Within the legal aspects of a board, there are 3 legal duties of all board members. There is the duty of care, where you participate actively in the decisions and you exercise your best judgment in doing so. There's the duty of loyalty, where you put the interest of the organization before your personal interests. That's taking off the parent hat. And then there's the duty of obedience, where you ensure that the school is in compliance with applicable federal, state, and local laws and adheres to its mission and bylaws. We recently were doing an accreditation for a school where they hadn't had an annual audit in 2 years and had ceased to file their Form 990. So they're out of compliance with the IRS and they're in real trouble. So as board members, you really need to adhere to these 3 duties. Board Source is a wonderful resource for interesting information on ideal trustees. And these are some of the things that they highlight: coming regularly, having regular attendance, and being prepared at all board meetings, being consumed with the best interests of the school, not the best interest of your child, maintaining confidentiality. Remember that expression, loose lips sink ships? Well, if you talk outside the board meeting, you're violating a confidentiality, that decisions remain in the boardroom, and that you may have robust and wonderful debates in the boardroom, but once a vote has been taken and a decision made, you get on board with that or you leave the board. The board speaks with one voice, the voice of the chair. You always publicly support the head of school. If you have a gripe with the head of school, you call, or the principal, you call that person separately, offline. You do not do that in a public forum. and you take every possible opportunity to be an ambassador and an advocate for the school in the greater community. High-performing boards have this strategic orientation. They do an annual self-assessment. They do wonderful onboarding and orientation for new board members. They do regular professional development for board members. They have a structure in their agenda for efficiency so that you're not meeting for hours and hours. Consent agendas have become very, very popular. And so that helps with efficiency. There's trust and respect for the head, and there is an annual evaluation for the head, and there's a multi-year contract that is given to the principal well in advance of the previous one expiring. Functional boards have a focus on generative questions, those conversations that propel the mission of the school and don't dwell on minutia. And high-functioning boards are data-driven so that they've done their homework and can make informed decisions based on true knowledge, not hypothesis and anecdotal information. Most of the schools in New Jersey are accredited through NJAIS. In some of your areas, you may be accredited by your state or local, or one of the big 8, WASC or others. In order to maintain your accreditation status, your board has got to stay in its lane. If they become an operational board, they'll be in violation of several standards for accreditation. And so there's a reason that you stay at the policy, fiduciary, and mission-driven level so that you maintain your school's accreditation. And that accreditation has bearings on whether or not you can offer I-20 forms, whether or not certain foundations will support you. So it's really important. What does an evaluation involve? So a board should do an annual evaluation of itself and include questions for each board member to evaluate him or herself. So this is impossible to read, but I did put a board evaluation up here. It asks for questions in preparation for the board meeting and about your knowledge of the mission, about how you support the head. And if you want to, at the end of this presentation, I will share with you my email. If you would like copies of board and principal evaluations, I'm happy to share those with you.
So, Carol, if you don't mind, also if you type your email address in the chat, it gets saved and I can send you everything that Carol will share with us, and that will just maybe make it easier.
On the slides, I'm happy to share the slides. I'm happy to share board evaluation samples, head of school evaluation samples. Any of those materials are my pleasure to share. So individual trustee evaluation, ask many of the same questions, but with narrative questions too. Things like, what do you think the board's 3 greatest accomplishments were during the course of the year? How do you evaluate your own performance on the board? What do you think the priorities of the board should be looking ahead? And so I'm happy to share those with you. Each year, the board should conduct an evaluation of the head of school, the principal. This should involve the board chair and the head setting goals over the summer, and then the spring evaluation, rate how the head did in realizing these goals. And this should not be something that the board imposes on the principal, but that you decide together. what sort of instrument you want to use. NAIS has a popular form that many principals and heads use. Many other boards make up their own, and it's been very effective. So I'm happy to share those samples with you. Here are just some questions. How is the head principal been effective in the following areas? Carrying out the school mission philosophy, communicating the mission to parents, providing to the board the necessary information to make policy, exhibiting forward-thinking leadership and anticipating the school's future, achieving the goals set this summer. Beware of the size of the board. You don't want it too small, and you certainly do not want it too big. Then generative questions just are not fruitful. The average size of functional independent school boards ranges from 15 to 22. And then you want to think about the skills and profiles of board members. If you're about to launch into a building project, you might want to have people who are knowledgeable in construction, in supplies. You might want to have a legal person on your board. You might want to have a real estate person on your board. If you're about to launch a capital campaign, someone who's knowledgeable about fundraising and has experience with capital campaigns in other forums. If your school is having some enrollment crises, then someone with a background in marketing might be helpful. And then avoid having too many current parents on your board. It's so hard for them to take off the parent hat. Past parents, alumni, really constructive people in the community, as well as a few current parents, are often the profiles of highly functional boards. Be sure to specify term limits. That most common term limits are a 3-year term for a board member with the opportunity to renew for a second term of 3 years, and then you rotate off the board for at least a year before being invited and voted back on. Look at your bylaws for the term limits on board officers also. Typically, board officers serve a 2-year term with the possibility for renewal. There's some that who are governance experts that say it's always good to have 1 or 2 people on who have the long view, the institutional memory. So getting people to cycle back on is not a bad idea, but you do want to have balance. I'm also a real fan of never voting somebody on the board without vetting them thoroughly. And I think the best way to vet them is to have them serve on a board committee so that you see how they interact with others. Do they show up on time? Do they come prepared? Have they done their homework? Do they contribute constructively to the conversation, or do they have some sort of agenda of their own? There are wonderful resources on independent school governance. NJAIS holds an annual trustee enrichment day. Next year, it's on November 14th, and we're going to do it via Zoom. We always have sessions on Trustee 101 for new trustees. We have advanced trusteeship. We do things on launching a capital campaign, succession and transition plans if you think you're going to be losing your head anytime soon. Really important fundamental issues. NAIS has a section on its website on governance that has some very good resources. Annually, NAIS publishes something called the Trustee Handbook. It was redone a few years ago by Donna Oram and Deborah Wilson. And it's most boards will give new board members a copy of the Trustee Handbook. It has pithy chapters and then checklists about what you want to be sure to do and know as a board member. NAIS also publishes annually something called the Trend Book. What many functional boards will do is get a copy of that trend book and give it to board members and assign chapters. I want you to read the chapter on trends in international students. I want you to read the chapter on fundraising. I want you to read the chapter on trends in enrollment. And then at a board meeting, let the person who read that chapter do a presentation on what those trends are and the generative questions that they engender so that the board can really be thinking strategically and knowledgeably. I mentioned BoardSource. It has a very fine website that has some very good documents for board governance. NJAIS lawyers are Larry Schwartz and Stephanie Schwartz. They are wonderful at helping boards through thorny issues. We have materials for board members on our website, and any of the New Jersey schools are certainly always welcome to call me. If board members don't understand what their real role is, it's not a pretty picture. And it can really lead to school instability and misunderstandings that just are not good fundamentally and at the most basic level for the students. So stay in your lane, do your work well, be informed, and it will be a happy and joyous and wonderful association. So now I've got a number of case studies, and the way that we're going to do this is I will read them, and then you're going to put opinions in the chat room, and then we'll come back and you are welcome to unmute yourself, and we can discuss these. So here's our first case study. The head of school hired a new fourth grade teacher. A strong and vocal group of parents decide they don't like this teacher and are about to launch a petition among the parents asking for her replacement immediately. The main complaints are that the teacher is too demanding. She doesn't fit in with the culture of the school. She gives too much homework. The parents decide that since a board member also has a child in the class, they should call this board member and demand instant action. What does the board member do? What is the role of the board in this case? So why don't you put your reactions and your thoughts on this case study in the chat room?
You want them to type in the chat?
Yep, what they think about this.
Okay. Yeah, they're coming up now. Would you like to read them, or do you want me to read them to you?
Why don't you read some of them, Layla?
All right. What it says, what is the role of the principal in this case? I would add, it's a question. Board members should defer the issue to the principal. The board member may speak with the principal about school policies about the following: homework policy by grade level. Board member is also a parent at this time. They should have a conversation with the principal and bring their grievance. Okay. To direct this case to the principal, board member doesn't have any authority to hire or fire. The solution for this case can be found in the school official policy. So there's some different things here. A board member should defer from making any decisions on this matter, it becomes a conflict of interest.
All interesting thoughts. Thank you, everyone. So when a parent complains to the board, refer the parent to the appropriate administrator or to the head of school. The head supports the teacher, but also troubleshoots with the teacher. If necessary, the academic leadership of the school meets with a small group of parents to discuss the issues. The board refrain is, thank you for your call, but the role of the board is at a policy and strategic level. Complaints like this belong with the division head or the head of school. So board members really need to know how to navigate the school. When you're a board member, if you've got a problem with something going on in your class, you're not a parent, you're a board member at all times. So you cannot get involved in the complaint process. You can just redirect. Okay, case study number 2. Apex Academy is a school in transition. There's a new head, new board, a new board chair, and many new board members. They are learning the appropriate role of an independent school board of trustees, but seem especially reluctant in their role of fundraising. None want to go on the ask with the head of school or director of development. The chair of the development committee of the board only wants to sign thank you letters generated by the advancement staff. It is difficult to set goals for fundraising during these turbulent times too. What are some concrete steps the board, head, and development staff could take together to help the school in this critical role of fundraising? So put some ideas in the chat room if you would. Are you going to come up with some ideas?
There's one. Here they come. Where is the school standing in terms of finance? Needs assessment should be the first step.
That's a great idea.
Creating a strategic fundraising plan to involve major stakeholders in this area. Creating a fundraising committee that includes parents in a plan for fundraising events collectively.
Those are all really good ideas. So the board's function in fundraising is to provide leadership, financial support, and connect donors and potential donors to the school. All board members are fundraisers. While the development committee may have the more formal responsibilities, all board members have an important role in this area. All board members are school ambassadors at all times. The board should set a goal of 100% board giving to the school every year. The board members should make the school one of their top charities for annual giving. On the agenda for many really good boards, they'll have the agenda, they'll have the mission of the school, and then they'll have, remember our goal, 100% board giving. Have you sent in your donation yet? You really want to pay attention to that. The board, the development committee, the head of school, and the development advancement staff should work together to set realistic goals and strategies with donors. So you came up with good ideas in this area, but remember there are action steps that really support the school in this important area. Some strategic questions regarding fundraising. What role does the board play in educating the school community about the importance and the benefits of philanthropy? NAIS has a booklet that many schools use during their back to school night or their opening of school, whatever sort of function you have for the new parents new to your school, that talks about philanthropy. Because if people are coming from a public school, they may have a very different mindset and not realize the gap between tuition and what it actually costs to educate a child at an independent school. How can you best work with donors to ensure strong, consistent giving in the new tax environment? That's where you really have to work with your development, advancement people and strategize. How can you continue to develop major gifts while cultivating mid-level donors who may no longer have tax incentives to give, but could develop into more substantial donors in the future? This is where the board's development committee really can be so helpful and generative. How regularly does the board review the school's endowment management, from policies to asset allocation? So that's if your school is lucky enough to have an endowment. The investment committee is usually the one that oversees the endowment management, and you need to have a really good endowment management policy and think very hard about ever taking money from a draw from that endowment that's not planned. And 4% seems to be the norm for schools that do take a draw. How often does the development staff report to the board to assess the relative effectiveness of board efforts and the need to adapt as appropriate to new fundraising opportunities? The really functional boards usually have admissions. The director of admissions come to one board meeting a year to report on what happened in admissions. And development usually reports twice a year. And the finance officer is usually there as an invited guest at usually any critical board meeting where tuition or finances are being discussed. Fundraising is fun. I really believe that. It's all about relationships. And it's also about storytelling. If you're serving on the board of your school, you have to love it at a very basic level, or you wouldn't be giving that time to the school. And so when you're doing the fundraising, you get to tell the good stories about the school, where the kids have gotten into college, the culminating project in the 5th grade, the winner of the Westinghouse in the high school, the robotics team doing wonderful things. It's really a good thing to do. And if you're uncomfortable doing an ask, get trained. There are the development directors are really good at this, and they're development consultants who really are the experts in teaching you how to do an ask effectively. We have regular sessions at Trustee Enrichment Day about how to do the ask and not feel awkward. Okay, case study number 3. Oh, Lordy. A disgruntled board member who is also a current parent decides to pull his children out of the school in a fit of pique over his child's placement with a teacher he doesn't like. In an act of public defiance and retribution, he sends an "It is with a heavy heart that I must have my children leave the school I love" letter to all the board members and parents, indicating his loss of confidence in the effectiveness of the leadership of the head and the board. The letter causes quite a stir of concern in the parent body, not to mention the board. The person, though withdrawing his children from the school, has not offered to resign from the board. What should the board do? What about the head? Put some ideas in the chat room, please.
This is a tough one, Carol.
It is, and it's a pretty common one.
Well,
So I like ignore and let him go, but you cannot ignore this board member. This should be added to the bylaws. That's a really good point, that if your bylaws stipulate that if you resign from the board in a fit of pique and you're removing your children, you really should resign from the board. So all interesting responses. So this brings up the issue of who speaks for the board. One of the issues is the proper boundary between board governance, setting policy, and the head who oversees day-to-day operations. Board members should never meet with staff, especially under these circumstances. Under no circumstances would your D&O coverage for individuals be covering you in meeting with individual staff members. You could be sued and the D&O would not cover you. One person speaks for the board, and that's the chair. You must not be seen as the court of appeal by which to circumvent the decisions of the head. So let's go back to this. I would say that this disgruntled board member, who's also a disgruntled current parent, has pulled their child from the school. He needs to withdraw from the board. And if he doesn't, then the committee of trustees has the right to remove the person from the board. The head needs to be protected by the board and supported in this instance. So this is, I will tell you that this is a fairly common occurrence in a lot of schools. Okay, our next one. A board member thinks, a board member thinks that the outside of the building is looking a little bit unkempt. He knows that the head is very busy with curricular and other matters and decides that he will take care of it himself. He tells the buildings and ground staff of the school that the head's job ends at the door and brings in cleaning people from his own business. The head feels undermined, uninformed, and now her facilities staff have doubt in her leadership. What is the board to do? Put some ideas in the chat room, please.
Carol, can you make me co-host again, please?
Let me see if I can do that. There you go.
Thank you.
You know, there have been a couple of times where people have said the board should have policy about this. And so one of the requirements for many accrediting protocols is that the board have a policy manual that includes the policy on endowment, that includes the policy on financial aid, that includes a grievance policy, that states the chain of control. So having a policy manual for the Board of Trustees is a really good idea. Part of that policy manual should have the annual conflict of interest and confidentiality pledge that every board member should sign. So somebody thinks that the board member can take care of the outside as long as he confers with the head of school. So let's look at Boundaries and bothering the head. Facilities management is part of day-to-day operations. They're usually overseen by the business manager who reports to the head of school. The inclination not to bother the head is usually misguided. Heads appreciate being informed. That's the culture of no surprises. Getting your own people in to clean up what you consider an unkept grounds is a conflict of interest. And it also brings up insurance concerns, risk management concerns for the school. So if you think the outside of the school is unkempt, go and talk to the head of school about it. You're a board member and in line at a local grocery store. A parent in the school approaches you and states that she has heard all is not well at the school. What do you do? Put your ideas in the chat room, please. And I'm sure you have all experienced this at some point. When I ran the school in the Virgin Islands, I often sent my husband and son to do the grocery shopping, so I didn't have to have people looking in my cart and stopping me in the aisle to talk school business. Layla, can you read any of the responses?
If we have any yet.
Here we
You
go.
let the head know about it and ask the head about it. Schedule a meeting with the parent and the principal, head of school. Remind the parent to follow the proper channels of communication. Speak with the principal.
Okay, so for the person who said schedule a meeting, your role as a board member is not to get involved in meetings like this. You've got to have a refrain that it's your teachable moment. What's the role of the board? So many parents in the school thinks that the board is making the decisions for the school. They don't realize you're setting policy for the school. You're not the big decision makers. The day-to-day operations lie with the head of school. So your refrain is, I serve on the board, but it's the role at the school. But if its role at the school is financial and strategic and at the policy level, complaints like this go to the head of school. Be an ambassador for your school at every possible moment. If they say, oh, I hear things are blowing up at blah, blah, blah school. I hear that teachers are leaving and students are leaving. You say, oh, gee, well, you know, we love the school ourselves and we're dedicated to it. And I'm giving my time at the board level. And just so that you know, the board level works on policy, on strategy, on finances. We don't deal with parent complaints like this. So please go and talk to the head of school. Usually they'll do it. Okay, a board member demands of the head of school or the principal that he fire a faculty member, a staff member. Is that within the board's purview? What do you think?
We have one response of no.
No. If the school is a family owned without bylaws.
What does that mean? Yes. Huh.
Oh, these are interesting responses. A board member demands of the head of school that he fire a staff member. Is that within the board's purview? Best practices say absolutely not. You can bring your complaint to the principal, and unless there is absolute malfeasance board members should never be saying, you need to fire that person.
But even then, Carol, isn't it, let's say, a staff member's committing something, against the unethical or against policies, wouldn't the board just bring that to the attention of the principal and say, this needs to be investigated and handled?
Exactly, Layla. Please investigate this. I want you to know about this. But you don't say fire that person. That would be a real violation of best practices.
Would you mind addressing this one? This is an interesting notion. No one person should have power of hiring and firing. It should be a committee decision.
It depends on the position. Head of school searches typically have a search committee. The director of development is often run by a search committee that includes a parent, the chair of the development committee on the board, and the head of school. But otherwise, the head is in charge of hiring faculty, staff, and administrators, and should be signing off on all of those contracts.
Would you mind if I say something, Carol,
Sure.
as well? When the board feels it necessary to make decisions like this for the principal, isn't it a sign of not trusting the ability of the principal in the first place? And isn't that should be a priority? That should be, does the person the board hired know what they're doing? And if not, then why were they hired? So that kind of, it goes back to that, I think, when it comes to this conflict of interest, who decides on what.
And it also underscores the need for the board chair at school to have regular and profoundly wonderful communications, and the importance of annual evaluation. So if people think the head is not trustworthy and not hiring good people, that comes through the evaluation.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Board members need to remember to stay in their lane, especially regarding issues of hiring, firing, any issues regarding the curriculum, the program. You can bring that to the attention of the head, but that is not a board decision. So the whole issue of malfeasance, that's where you'd ask the head to conduct an investigation. And heads know how to do that and involve the school's legal counsel appropriately. A board member is eager to exercise her role in being a fiduciary. She is not altogether pleased with the report she sees about the school's finances and calls the business manager directly. She demands to see a full accounting of the school's finances, including salary information on every employee. Is this the right chain of command? Is she requesting the right information? Are fiduciaries of the institution, and at every board meeting, you should be seeing the finances that have been reviewed in advance of the board meeting by the finance committee. The board should always make requests to speak to staff members, to administrators through the head of school. The head is your one employee. So you don't go directly to the business manager, the CFO, and say, I want to see the profit and loss statement. You request that through the head of school. You don't go to admissions and say, what are inquiries like right now? That all comes through the head of school. Functional boards really think carefully about what they need to know to govern well. Really good boards often have dashboards of, we need to know where we are with our fundraising at this point in the year compared to last year, where we are with our inquiries compared to last year, where we are with enrollment, overall enrollment. And the finance committee can look at a more granular level at the profit and loss statement. But you don't do that by going directly to the CFO. You do it through the head, and the finance chair should have a really good working relationship with the head and with the CFO. The Board of Trustees sets the salary for one person, and that's the head of school, and sets policy and budget, and then leaves the head to set the salaries for everyone else. So you really do not need to be at the granular level of looking at every employee's salary. The school has received complaints from current and past parents about favoritism. It is perceived that board member children get special attention, recognition, and that certain rules do not pertain to them. This allegation of favoritism is causing tension in the school and among the parents who are not on the board. It is also making faculty and administrators uncomfortable. What is the board to do? Why don't you put your thoughts on this in the chat room? The issue of favoritism.
There is this question about finances. What if the principal doesn't want to do the finances, to deal with them?
It's part of the role of the head of school to oversee the finances of the school, but he or she should have a really strong business officer, a really strong CFO, and they should work in tandem. And the treasurer of the board, who's usually the chair of the finance committee, can be an aid in that, at that level too. I would also urge that head of school who doesn't want to deal with finances to know that experienced heads learn that you follow the money, and it tells the story of the strength of a school. And there are great places you can go to get better training in understanding school finances. The #1 place to go is to NBOA. And that's the National Business Officers Association, run by Jeff Shields. And they do fabulous training. And then we at NJAIS, we do an annual meeting about what board members and heads need to know about school finances. And it's run by Nat Connard, who's the president of the Board of Trustees for NJAIS, who's an honors graduate of Tuck and worked at Bain Consulting before he became a head of school. And Olaf Weckkesser, who's the brilliant business manager at the Peck School, who came out of the corporate world. So if the head doesn't like finances, he or she needs to learn, and there are places to go to learn, and make sure you have a really strong finance officer in your school and a really good chair of your finance committee. Okay, so here we are on the one of favoritism, everybody. What's the board going to do?
Here it says, let's see. No, the principal's teacher observations and evaluations should answer this. I guess that means that it would have come up, they would have seen it in the school. The board should ask the principal to investigate this case, have a meeting with the principal about the issue. The board should have addressed this topic in a board meeting. The board and the head must agree that there should be no favoritism in the school. The principal teacher, I don't know if the chair should meet with the head of school regarding this?
So where's the boundary between policy and management in this issue? There should be a policy that says board members have no favoritism for their children in the school. And if there is some perceived, that should be brought to the attention of the head. If you're a board member and you're in a parent-teacher conference, do you identify yourself as a board member?
And our schools are so small that that wouldn't be necessary. They'd know.
You'd know, right? But when you need to be clear when you are wearing your parent hat and when you're wearing your board member hat. And board members should not ask for special privileges. And who should respond to these allegations of favoritism? Do we have some opinions on this? The head of school, the head of school. And in some cases, the principal, the head of school, along with the board chair, so that there is that united voice of, we've looked into this and this is a board policy. And it would be the board chair speaking with the entire, on behalf of the entire group. Okay. The principal can do nothing right, according to two people on the board. They complete the annual head principal evaluation with very negative comments and are often challenging the head at board or public meetings about any initiatives. What is the board to do with this evaluation? Who communicates this? How do you intervene and help this situation? Who communicates the result of the principal evaluation to that person? So this brings up the whole issue of evaluation, and it brings out the idea of outliers. Let's just. So any thoughts on this one you want to put in the chat room? So I think that when you look at a head of school, and when you look at any of these evaluations, and successful schools have been doing some pulse surveys this year that have been really helpful. You always look for the outliers, the ones that are really negative and the ones that are really, really positive. So the ones that are very negative may inform some questions you want to ask, but they're also worrisome. I think challenging a principal at a board meeting or at a public meeting about initiatives can be very bad form. You're supposed to be an ambassador for the school. You're supposed to be supporting your head of school. If you're challenging that person in a public forum and getting involved in any form of what could be perceived as public humiliation, it's wrong. So I would encourage these naysayers, these negative people, to schedule a personal meeting, maybe with the board chair, the head of school, and those two people privately, so that you can clear the air and figure out some method of proceeding in a positive, more constructive manner for the benefit of the students, for the good of the school. The head of school evaluation, the principal evaluation, should be done annually, as we've said repeatedly. There's usually a principal support group that's part of the board. And it is usually that group that's the board chair, sometimes the board secretary, and one other person. If it's somebody who has a background in HR, in psychology, in management, then that's the best way to communicate the principal's evaluation. And I would make a really heartfelt plea right now. At NJAIS, we hold weekly head of school Zoom calls. 2 weeks ago, we had one where the heads were not just running on fumes, they were running on empty. They have given their heart and soul to working through COVID, providing safe schools and constructive academic programs remotely, in person, in a hybrid. They didn't take vacations. They need vacation. They need positive reinforcement. This year, more than any other year, if your board can step up to the plate and give honors, accolades, attaboys, pats on the back, whatever, really enthusiastic thanks to the principal, it would be really timely.
Thank you, Carol. Absolutely true. And more likely than not, our principals tend to wear many hats already. And with this pandemic, it just meant that multiplied by 100. So it was exhausting for our school leaders.
Well, and what's interesting to me, Leila, because I see this at an international level, is how many unexpected and abrupt early retirements and resignations of school have been coming this spring. And that just puts schools in a tizzy. And so for a board to step up, give a bonus if you can, give a merit award, give the head something really nice. Now's the time.
Right.
So, Leila, I will send you copies of the slides if you would like them. I will send copies of head of school evaluations, of trustee evaluations. If anyone would like to contact me, there's my email address. Would anyone like to unmute and ask any questions further or make any comments?
I was actually curious. You mentioned the Virgin Islands. Which island and which school?
I ran the Good Hope School when it existed in that incarnation on St. Croix in the U.S.
Oh my, I'm actually from St. Croix. I was born and raised on St. Croix, and I went to Good Hope School.
So who was your head?
Miss Provost.
Ah, well, I was there for 2 years and had a very memorable experience, and it is a gorgeous island. And I still have many friends there.
It's a small world.
Where are you living now?
I'm in Nashville now. I've been off island for about 9 years or more.
Congratulations. Wow. And you know that Good Hope is now Good Hope Country.
Yes, yeah, I've heard that they merged.
Yep.
So, what a small world, subhanAllah. We do have a hand raised.
Please.
Yes. Can I just, I see a lot of requests in the chat for sharing. Please make sure.
I have one question after the question.
No, actually, if you would please put your email address in the chat. So when I send the PowerPoint, the recording, all of that, I have your email address. Please put it in the chat. And
Leila?
yes.
Salam alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. I'm not sure. I see a hand raised, but I'm not sure that that's the person speaking.
This is
This is Dr. Ahmed. If I'm allowed to ask a quick question, very quick question.
Okay.
So this is to the presenters. Thank you so much, Mr. Leila, for facilitating this PD. May Allah reward you and accept from everyone. And thank you so much, Mrs. Carole Everett, for the informative session. I personally learned a lot from this, from attending. A very quick question. When I was doing my doctorate a few years back, I learned for the first time from one of our teachers, or, you know, it was when we took, he mentioned something very interesting that I came to learn for the first time. He said, in a few states, probably 15, 12, 17, less than 20, school board member receive kind of a monetary compensation. At that time, like 1,100, 1,300. I think in New York, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was one of them, because our teacher who mentioned that, he used to be also a head of school in New York for 25 years. Anyway, he basically, I would like for you to comment on this, and how can this, would that make an impact on the board principal relationship as well as on the school and the school community? Because personally, I would love for everything to be paid for, because that comes with more responsibility, more accountability, and naturally with the better outcomes and results. Thank you so much.
Let me make sure that I'm understanding your question properly. Are you that you have heard of independent school boards where the board members are paid to participate on the board?
I am not sure if, I know for sure it's always the reference is for public school, but I don't know if he mentioned the private ones. I'm not sure about.
So, I really.
Now, whether it is the case or not, don't you think if the board members are paid, of course, not the regular salary, because they don't spend 5 days a week and 40 hours, but I strongly advocate for the board members in independent and private school to be paid $1,000 a month.
So I guess the question is,
to hold them more accountable.
Yeah. So the question is, does this happen, Carole? I've never heard of it.
No.
And would it make things better or worse?
So it's such an interesting question. I am not an expert in public schools, and so I don't know if public school boards who are voted in by their towns, by their townships, by their municipalities are paid or not. It was my understanding that those were voluntary jobs, but I'm not an expert at public schools. I am an expert in independent schools. Yeah. And I will tell you that I have never heard of an independent school board member being paid. Instead, those are the leaders in fundraising and take leadership in doing good things for the school, like when there's an opportunity to attend trustee enrichment day, the board members pay for him or herself. It's not the school's responsibility to pay for them. When the school needs to get each board member a trustee handbook from NJAIS, board members pay for their own copy. That's much more common. Now, do I think it would help if board members were paid? I don't, because fundamentally, the people who serve on the board do this out of a sense of service for a mission that they truly believe in.
Thank you, Carole. We have a few hands raised. I think it is Sikander Masia. Sorry, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. But.
No, I think you did. Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for taking my question. Is if we have a situation, how a board should deal with this, then you're one of our best teachers, a teacher, and the principal develops significant differences. then a situation comes that you lose the best teacher. How to prevent this happening again and again, and how to deal with this situation so you don't lose the principal as well as the best teachers.
So are you saying that a school is losing its best teachers?
Yes, due to their differences differences with the principal. So they're not getting along with the principal.
There are surveys that a board could do that would not be violating best practices. I would never recommend that the board meet with the faculty in an open town hall and let all mayhem ensue. That's not showing support for the head of school. And that's a real violation of best practice. But having the head of school send out, ISM has a really good culture and climate survey for faculty members that asks about things about faculty morale and leadership. And then the head shares that with the board, with all the warts. And then there can be a constructive conversation with the board chair and maybe the head support committee about ways to rectify the situation so that faculty morale is better. And you know, there are times where there are just personality conflicts, and that happens in every organization. And you somehow work through them constructively.
Yeah.
What if there is a pattern that there are more than one teacher leave? Then how should we deal with that?
Talk to the head of school and say, we are detecting a pattern. Can you explain this to us?
We have an exit survey that when faculty leave or students leave, it's actually for anyone who leaves. They're different, a little bit different each one, but having teachers maybe complete that, or and then having the head of school maybe share that data. Why, why are students leaving? Why are families moving? Things like that. I would just caution if there's a real root problem with the way the principal's running the school that's causing this conflict, then of course the board has to figure that out. But always be very cautious not to interfere with the relationships. It could be, I've worked at several schools. So when you come in as the new person sometimes and you start making changes, there's a certain culture in the school, and then this principal starts to change things that people are not accustomed to. They may not like that principal, and there may be a conflict, and it may not be just one or two teachers, it may be 5, because those 5 teachers had a certain way of doing things, and they were, it was fine, and now this person's changing everything. So, I think looking for the root cause of the problem is really important, and not making an assumption that one is wrong, one is right, and one is wrong.
Well said, Leila. Brava. Yeah. I agree entirely. There are also people who are resistant to change. Mm-hmm. And it is typical in times of transition to lose people. That's just what happens in the life of a school.
Correct. All right. I think Insaf was next.
Yes, thank you, Sister Leila, and thank you, Ms. Everett. A very, very informative session. Thank you so much for that. My question is, what would you recommend, since the board is in charge of evaluating school principal or head of school, would you recommend the whole board to be involved with this process, or would you recommend a select committee within the board to be responsible for the evaluation?
So the evaluation of the head of school should go to all board members. In some schools, it also goes to the administrative team. It does not go to the entire faculty. It does not go to the parent body. Those would be the 2 groups, the entire board and the administrative team, who are the direct reports to the head of school, do the annual evaluation of the head of school.
So if the board, let's say we have 10, 11 members on the board, all those members should be involved with that, with the evaluation, or can they, you know, how they have like a fundraising, I don't know, maybe financial committee, and then operations or facilities committee, or academics committee and whatnot. So would there be a committee for that task, or they should all be responsible for evaluating the head of school or principal?
The way that it's typically done is the board chair and the head decide on what sort of survey they're going to use for the annual evaluation. That survey goes out to all the board members and the senior leadership team, administrators in the school. It's returned usually to the board chair, although if there is a head support committee as a committee of the board, then it could go back to that group. And then it is shared with the head of school by the board chair and the head of the head support committee. Is that
Understood. Thank you. Yes, it does. Thank you.
great?
Thank you.
There was a point where corporate America was very much in favor of 360s as evaluation. And so that got to be popular in schools. That lasted for about 2 years. And the number of heads who quit and were so wounded and did not learn from this, it was not constructive, has made it so that personalizing this evaluation in a way that's appropriate for your school and the culture and the particular strengths of your head of school works so much better.
Carole, would you mind if I share how we do it here? Because we are an NJAIS school, and it was with your guidance that we actually set up our evaluation this way. As head of school, I meet with the board chair or the executive committee, and we actually come up with goals for me for the year. Although Carole suggested about 3 or 4, we actually came up with 7, which was not a good idea.
Ambitious, Layla.
But that setting of the goals and then the evaluation also covered some other areas because it was a survey type for the entire board. Being able to focus on some very specific goals, like we did 7 the first year, but the second year we did 4, really made it easier for me, because it's stressful to think about 10 or 11 or 15 people giving you feedback who may or may not understand the things you do. But I think having conversations with your board or your board chair about what you would like to see in the process of evaluation, because it should be something that helps you do your job better. It's not a gotcha evaluation, just like we don't do teacher evaluations to look at what's wrong with to judge teachers. This is a process that helps us grow and develop our skills. And I think understanding that is really important with the board chair and the board members as well. And so that those conversations are really important in the beginning. And I'm hoping that I can get a few of those evaluations and send them to you along with the PowerPoint, inshallah. We have a few more. I think, I don't know if Sammy was next, Sammy Musa.
Yes, ma'am. And thank you so much for a beautiful session. I have a question and a comment, please. I think it was mentioned that for the board to be most effective, that it has to be from 15 to 22, right, members. Do you think that depends on the size of the school? What if we have a school of 800 to 850 students and another school that have more than 1,000? That's one part of the question. The other part, how can we encourage members of the community to join the board? And the last thing, it's a comment. Alhamdulillah, we are blessed to have in our board some of the graduates of our school. So they were there as students, and now some of them are parents. And their feedback is amazing. They saw the school so many years ago, they know what the school needs. So Ms. Carole was saying that we have to have a fundraiser or someone with background in marketing. So what do you think of that? Isn't it a great idea to bring some of those who attended the school and now they're serving on the board? Thank you so much.
So your first question was about size of school based on size of board based on size of school. We have our largest school in NJAIS has 1,500 students, and the size of that board is 24 board members. The smallest school in NJAIS has 38 students, and that board has 12 members. So I think we have one school in the association that has 38 board members, and they don't get a quorum. Their conversations go on for far too long. It's not a functional number. So I think if you've got a tiny school, it's good to have at least 8 because you need the fundraising there. And the energy for that. 12 is a really good number for small schools. When you get larger, yes, expand the board, but not so large that it's dysfunctional. Where you can use talent is in the committees. Board committees do not just have board members on them. They can be used as the farm team for your potential board members. So you can get buy-in by getting the good people on those committees. And then, as I said earlier, you can see if they are really potential board members. Do they come prepared? Do they show up on time? Are they really engaged at a proper level? Do they play well with others, as we say in the school world? Your second comment was about, help me here.
Alumni coming up.
I think having alumni on the board is brilliant. They know the school, they had their experience. If they're willing to serve, it shows some level of dedication. I think it's great to have alumni on the board. Past students are also usually really good and valuable.
Thank you, Carol. We're about 1:32, and I want to make sure we get these last few questions. And I'm sorry, I see the screen name is OATTUM, but I don't know what the name is. But you can ask your question, please.
Thank you. No, my name is Omar. So I had a quick question. So I'm on a board, and it's struggling maybe to get all the.
I'm losing you, Omar.
This webinar that you provided is very useful. But I was going to ask you, so I understand you're going to make this video and your notes available, but is it possible, because I've attended I've been on other school boards or other school committees, and they'll oftentimes have a quiz of like these type of scenarios for maybe board members who skip through some of the video, don't pay attention. I mean, I work at a university, and they oftentimes do use the quiz because they know a lot of people will skip going through maybe the video, and they'll just kind of read through the notes quickly, and they'll take the quiz, and they use the quiz as a learning tool for them to learn the most important points. Because I could make one, but then, it could be perceived that I'm being biased. But if it's something made by a third party expert like yourself, that would obviously be much more effective.
You want a quiz to go along with the presentation? Is that what you're saying?
I think so. I mean, every board or every committee training I've ever experienced, oftentimes, has a quiz associated with it, or that I've done in a public school and a private school, just something pretty basic that people can obviously pass. But and at the university, we often use these because we know that maybe some people may not be able to attend an hour-and-a-half meeting, right? Even though they should. or training or webinar, and they may skim through it, especially on a lot of boards in our communities have a lot of physicians, a lot of attorneys. And so it's difficult for them maybe to devote this much time. So if they skim through the webinar, if they if they read the notes very quickly, and then there was like a follow-up quiz, that would kind of be a certification that they completed it, the training, and it could be submitted as evidence, let's say, for accreditation reviews.
Okay, all right, Carol?
Idea, Omar. Thank you for that. I do a monthly call, Zoom, with our NJAIS board chairs. And one of the board chairs are very generous and collegial in sharing some things that they do as boards. One board chair shared a letter that he reads out loud at the initial board meeting about, let's just remember that this is our role. And everybody then signs an affirmation, a board pledge that they have understood this. Others give a quiz. So maybe on my next board chair call, I can get someone to share one of these. And then I'm happy to share it with you.
Yeah, I think just a quiz from your presentation is actually adequate.
Omar, you want to make it?
I'd be happy to.
You make it, send it to us, and we'll send it back to you.
Okay. And do you want it as like a Word document or like as a doodle? Okay, a Word document.
Word
okay,
document.
All right. Once I get the notes, I will make a quiz, and I will be happy to, because I think many schools actually could use something like this as evidence. Because I often, like when I was in a public school committee, I had to take 6 hours of training, and I had to actually take a quiz and show that I passed to be on that committee and to be on a principal hiring committee even. And that way we knew the other members actually were, at least read through the notes.
Okay, sounds good, Omar, Brother Ahmad. We'll look forward to that.
Okay.
All right, so next, I'm not sure who was first. Zaria Khan.
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Laila. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you, Miss Carol, for sharing the case studies and walking us through it. It was excellent. I really learned a lot. My question is regarding the evaluations. The structure that we have at my school is we have head of school and we have principal. And as I have come to know that the head of schools at other schools have served either as principals or have been an educator for a very long time before they became head of school. But the head of school that we have is not an educator and has not served as a principal. So I was just curious in terms of evaluation, how does that play a role when the head of school is responsible to evaluate the principal and the principal has been in the school for a very long time, has been an educator over a decade. So just curious how that process should look like. Or is there any other school who has been in a similar situation, and what kind of procedure or process did they follow?
I hope it's all right to say this, but the Catholic schools have, most of the Catholic schools, especially the big ones, have two roles. They have a president and a principal, or the president and the head of school. And the president's role is usually external.
Sorry, go ahead.
So the president's role is not that of an educator. The president's role is overseeing finances, development, and buildings and grounds, whereas the head of school in that circumstance is the academic leader, overseeing faculty and curriculum program. And in that case, both of those leaders are evaluated because they both report to the board. It's almost like a co-headship. There are some Jewish day schools that have the same sort of format, but instead of calling them president, they call them executive director and head of school, or executive director and principal. So I really think it depends on how your school is set up in its administrative structure and what your chart looks like, your organizational chart looks like, to determine who actually completes the evaluation and who is actually the sole employee of the Board of Trustees.
Thank you, Carol. Brother Yaqub, did you have a question? I think you said in the chat, yes or no?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, thank you very much. Outstanding workshop, Ms. Everett. Thank you for CISNA and Ms. Layla for hosting and facilitating. Ms. Everett, my question is on the board. Do you have, or is it recommended to have like a representative from the parent-teacher organization, and plus from like the faculty of staff, or is that not considered best practices? And the reason I'm asking that question is so you get involvement from all of the major stakeholders, and perhaps because financial issues would be discussed maybe at those times, they're excused or they're excluded. I don't know. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
It's an excellent question. Many schools will have the head of their parent-teacher association as an ex officio non-voting member of the board. Other schools did that back in the 70s and 80s, and in the 90s determined that there were enough current parents on the board that they didn't need that official position represented on the board, and so ceased to do that. I have very definitive thoughts about including faculty members on the board. Because the head is the board's sole employee, to have a faculty member on the board is a conflict of interest. That person then becomes the head's boss, and that's just not appropriate. I think back in the 60s and 70s, it was very popular to have a faculty rep who would then go back and report to the faculty, well, I sat in on the board meeting, but they made me leave when they were going to talk about whatever. And what they found was that it was not only a conflict, but instead of engendering trust and infusing a better sense of communication, it obfuscated issues and created more conflict. So I absolutely think faculty members do not belong on the board. And I'd be careful about PTO leadership, because one of the things that we're hearing more and more from our schools is that parent-teacher organizations are dysfunctional these days and need some redirection. And so we'll be doing a professional development workshop on that sometime in August, about how to better shape your parent-teacher organization, make it a really functional, contributory and positive group within a school. Thank you for that question.
That was an excellent question. Is it Saad or Saeed? You had your hand up, but you no longer have your hand up.
No, it's okay. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Layla. How are you? A beautiful presentation. Thank you, Carol. Well, I had a couple of questions. MashaAllah, we have in the think tank brilliant people, and they asked them.
Okay.
And thank you for Carol. She answered. But I'm just going to go ahead and throw a scenario and maybe hear from Carol what she think. For a 30-year-old school, we tried different governing structures, but it seems that we are very comfortable with what Carol's suggesting, the committees. We do have committees, all kind of committees you think of. We do have the board, but we found out that these committees and the board, they don't have enough time, adequate time to finish their task. The term is 2 years. What do you think the best term for these boards, committees to finish these long-term objectives that they require 3 and 4 and 5 years sometimes to see it happen? That's one question. The term for the board, what do you think an adequate one? And second, do you divert from that structure of the committees and just rely on the head of the school and the LT and just the board without the committees? So 1 versus 2, which one would you pick?
This is really interesting. First of all, a 30-year-old school is in its infancy still.
Well, we're still in diapers. I agree with you.
Carol, so I think I mentioned to you before, Islamic schools in general, we're fairly young. We're babies compared to independent schools that are 100, 200 years old.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Especially in the New England states. So
yeah.
30 is a grandfather in our community. That's a pretty solid school. So if you were to ask in this group, we have schools that are like a year old, 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, but 30 is solid. MashaAllah. May Allah grant you another 100.
I threw 30 there. We're a little bit over 30. We were founded in 89. So we consider ourselves the pioneers in Islamic education. Alhamdulillah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's really wonderful. And thank you for educating me about the youth of Islamic schools. In New Jersey, we have Rutgers Prep that is 252. You know, there is this range. But in terms of term limits, the norm is for board members to serve 1 3-year term with the option to renew for another 3 years. That makes a total of 6 years to serve on the board. Strategic plans, strategic visioning, strategic thinking, whatever you want to call it these days, tend to go these days for 3 to 5 years. They're no longer the 10-year strategic. So for a board member to serve for 6 years, you get some follow through at the strategic level. In terms of use of committees versus the leadership team, there's another way to go with this: forming ad hoc task forces. So for instance, if you are thinking of, let's think about
maybe adding another campus or
yeah, I was going to say playground renovation. Adding another campus, that's a great one, Layla. You might want, instead of exclusively the Buildings and Grounds Committee, having some people from that committee serve on a very specific task force with a defined role to be the task force on exploring another campus. And they would have a defined role, a shortened period of time to complete the task, and expectations for when they would report out. Does that help you?
It does. It does. We tried both, and we settled on the committees. The intricacy of it is when you have, like I said, you know, we have. Alhamdulillah, we were at 825 before COVID. That's considerable in Islamic school, sizable school. And we opened another school in Houston, and we found out without the committees, academic, finance, and so on, it is hard on the LT. It puts a lot of stress on them, a lot of work. So when you have 7 committees helping out, we thought it's a little bit more beneficial at the end of the day. So I just wanted to hear your input on it, and I think you answered it beautifully. Thank you so much.
Finding it very interesting to hear that you have an academic committee. There are some schools that have a committee on program or committee on used to have them. They stopped doing it because that is the responsibility of the head of school. So an academic committee was disbanded at most of our NJAIS schools. The typical committees are finance, development, the committee on trustees, the audit committee. Did I miss any? Sometimes a marketing committee.
PR and also the PTO we have, but again, Carol, I think the element here we're missing probably, we're comparing the Islamic schools to other schools. Our pool of head of schools is much smaller than the regular private schools. If may I elaborate a little bit. So if you want to find a head of a school, looking in the whole United States, our resources, what's out there is limited comparing to private schools, non-Islamic schools. So we need, of course, your head of school is number one. That's your front line. That's your image, represents your school, and you want the best of the best. We don't have as much candidates as other private schools. Does that make sense?
Yes, but it also brings up leadership training. And Layla, you're brilliant at this, in sending those teacher leaders and those administrators for the Leadership Institute that NJAIS does to other leadership training, so that you are developing the bench, the future leaders looking towards the future.
Right, capacity
Thank you so
building.
much, Carol.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Right, I don't see any more hands. We are at 1:50. We've gone a little bit over, but the questions have been excellent. Are there any more questions or comments before we close out? We've held you longer than I told you we would, Carol, so I want to respect your time.
I thought we were on until 2 o'clock, Layla.
Oh,
So
I said 1:30, but okay, we can, so then that means we have a few more minutes. So are there any more questions or comments for Carol, or if you have any questions for me as well, be willing to address. I'm happy to see we have so many older schools here, 29, 30 years old, mashallah. Any other questions?
it has been my honor to be with all of you today. Layla, thank you for asking me to do this. I've so enjoyed working with your school over the years, and I hope this has been useful for people.
It has. Again, I want to thank you, Carole, so much for your time and your expertise and your wisdom. And thank you all, our board members and our principals and our heads of schools, for the amazing work that you do every day and serving our communities. May Allah reward you. Barakallah feekum wa jazakumullah khair, and may Allah accept it from all of you. Please make sure you can reach out to me as well if you have any questions or would like anything as a follow-up to this. And CISNA will provide more in the future, inshallah. If you are not a CISNA member, please join CISNA. Go to our website and become a member, and help support us so that we may continue to support you, inshallah. Again, thank you so much, Carole. It's been a pleasure doing this webinar with you, and I look forward to continuing to work with you with NJAIS.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone.
Right. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Thank you, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.